I saw a psychic, I went bungee jumping, I went to a cuddle workshop, laughter yoga, My Little Pony convention, all these things. But I learned psychologically what makes some of those experiences stand out and be more meaningful than others. Social is one thing, so a lot of the things that I remembered and that changed me were more about the people than the activity itself.
And there's a bunch of creative technology and techniques you can use to measure pupil dilation and sweat on your hands and heart rate and all of these things to see how someone actually felt in a moment. Rather than asking them, how did you feel? I can measure how you actually felt.
Things mediated through a screen are just by nature not as memorable. So there's this factoid that goes around that you'll never see a smartphone in your dreams, which when I think about it,
Really interesting.
it rings true.
Yeah.
So if you go around the museum and you take pictures of things, you're less likely to actually then remember what you saw.
So Patrick, thank you so much for coming in. Since we started this In Conversation series, we've always really wanted to get you on, so it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Just quick, overview of your background. So you're an applied behavioural scientist, an author, keynote speaker. You were a lead psychologist at Cambridge Analytica for a very interesting period at that business. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what applied behavioural science is, and perhaps some of your experience at Cambridge Analytica as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So applied behavioral science, I like to call it turning minds into money. So I mean taking the academic, scientific side of psychology, the studies and so on. I'm a university lecturer. I've published some papers and a couple of books, but taking that science and then thinking more practically, how do you actually use it in the real world? How do you use it to optimize adverts or landing pages or user experiences or whatever it might be? But crucially, not every nudge works for every person the same. So a nudge is a small tactic that can influence behavior. So if you're selling luxury handbags, social proof is not going to work very well because people don't want the handbag everyone else has. And vice versa, if you're selling baked beans, social proof will work well, but scarcity won't because nobody cares about limited edition beans, generally speaking. So it's really important to understand the psychology of a particular audience. And that's where the kind of Cambridge Analytica stuff comes in, of using data to read people psychologically and then sending them the right nudge that speaks to them in the right way.
It's so interesting when you get under the hood of this stuff, because you start to really understand there's such a deep psychological meaning for a lot of the stuff and the way we act and respond. So we're going to talk about this concept of, do brands really understand their customers? And I think a few years ago we worked together on a project, and we were doing a lot of work in experience frameworks with one of our clients, and your involvement on that work was to understand how to connect those experience frameworks to the underlying kind of core behavioural traits that were influencing how people really felt in experiences. Could you just tell us a little bit more about some of that, because it was fascinating.
So I've done a few pieces of work on the psychology of experiential, and there's a few principles that come through quite consistently. I mean, I don't think I'm going to blow anyone's mind when I say, for example, social experiences tend to be more effective than ones by yourself. One study even found that if you share chocolate with someone else, not only do you enjoy it more, but it tastes chocolatier, at least according to this survey that they did. So social is one of them, but I actually kind of learned firsthand some of these principles because I set myself the challenge of doing one new thing for every week of the year.
Right.
My wife had just had a baby, and I thought that would be a great time.
That's quite a daunting prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot of hard work, actually.
Yeah.
Making the list, finding the activities, booking them. I tried to see a psychic, and it was actually surprisingly difficult to get them to respond to emails. I guess I should have just put it into the ether. But yeah, I saw a psychic, I went bungee jumping, I went to a cuddle workshop, laughter yoga, My Little Pony convention, all these things. But I learned psychologically what makes some of those experiences stand out and be more meaningful than others. So as I said, social is one thing. So a lot of the things that I remembered and that changed me were more about the people than the activity itself. So laughter yoga, I had a very unusual lady teaching me that, who was kind of laughing about all of her frustrations in life. It was kind of darkly comical. But I remember that because of her rather than the actual stuff we were doing. So social is one thing. One really interesting principle was the power of friction and how, our lives are extremely easy these days, especially because of technology. Everything goes smoothly and quickly and without friction. That kind of makes us a bit miserable because we need purpose, we need investment.
Yeah.
And that's a huge opportunity for experiences to give people some investment, something to kind of work on in a way. So one of the most memorable experiences was a cuddle workshop where I had to, among other things, I had to hold a strange man's grizzled face cheeks between my hands and stare into his eyes for a minute. And that was very memorable. I hated it. As I said, I'm an introvert, but because it was hard work, because it was awkward, that actually made it more meaningful. So it's something very powerful in friction for experiences.
That's so interesting. You mentioned in that the idea of technology and acceptance of technology. Where do you think this is going? And we're so inundated with technology at the moment, and you get lots of differing opinions on embracing or pushing away.
Yeah.
Where's your head at with that?
I mean, a bit of a mix. There's some incredible opportunities with Web3. VR, for example, you can take people into a world they've never experienced and never possibly could experience in real life. And that's one of the things that makes experiences special, is what I call magic, but it's essentially being very emotional, very different, being a peak experience, as Maslow called them. And so VR can definitely facilitate that. The only thing is, things mediated through a screen are just by nature not as memorable. So there's this factoid that goes around that you'll never see a smartphone in your dreams, which when I think about it,
Really interesting.
it rings true.
Yeah.
And there's research showing that things are less memorable when you view them on a screen. So if you go around a museum and you take pictures of things, you're less likely to actually then remember what you saw, one study found. So it's a bit of a mix. There's some great potential, obviously, for personalization and immersion and everything. But I think really to get to people and to touch their heart, it needs to be face-to-face and physical.
One of the sort of most robust frameworks that's really stood the test of time for us is, and it really plays true to what you've just said there, is if you can get a clear connection between an experience moment, the emotion that evokes in a group of people, and the behavior that comes from that emotional moment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really need a huge amount more than that. And if you understand how those three things fit together, it becomes very, very easy. Well, not easy, but it becomes easier to then understand, okay, I now know why that experience is more powerful than that. Experience A is more powerful than experience B.
Yeah.
It's relatively easy nowadays to measure on-screen activity. So I can understand clicks on a website. I can understand how someone moved through a customer experience on a telephone system or on a website. But it's a lot harder when you try and compare on and offline, particularly, but also service, space, physical and digital. If you try and understand that whole collection and all of those moments that customers interact with a brand, there isn't really any robust system. Apart from MPS, which we'll talk about in a second, there isn't really any robust system that allows you to think, okay, I know I need to invest my dollar in enhancing a website, or I need to invest my dollar in enhancing my space. How do you really understand the different steps?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree with simplicity. And whenever I do quant research and surveys, often, if you ask people these attitudinal statements, they tend to correlate with each other, and what they're ultimately measuring is, do they like this or not? Do they feel what's called an approach or avoidance motivation? Are they pulled towards it or pushed away from it, don't like it? And so I think NPS does a good job at measuring that really key thing in a very simple way. But there's a huge amount of nuance, obviously, that it's missing, and also it's self-report. So it's what people think they think, which might not actually be connected to how they actually feel. So they might, for example, feel an attachment to the brand, and that kind of clouds their actual experience. And so they might be responding based on rather than actually how they felt. And so there are lots of other techniques, I think, that are useful to kind of get under people's skin and measure subconscious and emotional metrics, which are really key because there's the long and the short of it. You know, there are these short-term activation things online of people clicking at physical experiences. It can be, did people show up? Did they take a sample? Did they buy a ticket? But these are not great. But really what's useful is the long-term stuff, which is memory formation and brand building. So was there some kind of emotional shift? Did that change how they viewed the brand and make it more front of mind and mentally available? And the great thing is you can measure these things now with reaction time testing and things like that, biometrics as well. So I think we can definitely do better than NPS, as good as it is.
One of our sort of missions as an agency is always to focus on how we creating customer lifetime value. So we're really often an experience is there because you want people to come back and re-experience it, or certainly go home and tell their family that, wow, this flight was different, and you need to now book with this airline because it felt so different, or the same in a store. It just feels different, and often that world is intangible, often it's subliminal, but it's just about creating that connection, that relationship with customers, so that they build affinity and they build long-term connection. But really the beauty that we have now found is that if you can connect, if you can effectively measure the strength of that connection between, on the one hand, an experience intervention, so anything I do, so even if it's sending an email out to customers, or it's a service moment on board an airline, or it's the threshold moment as you walk into a store. If I can measure how someone felt in that moment, I then understand through the behavioral science techniques that we've talked about a collection of those emotions and effectively their interpretation of that experience moment. And the beauty is then if I can correlate that to actual behaviour, i.e. willingness to spend more money, you've got that causal connection between, I know that experience has caused them to come and buy more. And it's never that simple. And the reality is you end up realising that really it was 5 different things, and then they were grumpy that day, so they actually didn't spend any more. So there's so much nuance to it, but we're just starting as an industry actually to solve a problem here that we've been trying to solve for a decade. And of course we wouldn't have been able to do it with AI, but it's just so fascinating to us that we're on this threshold of actually getting into a totally new world of measurement now. The last thing we want to kind of cover is this idea you've put in my mind about states versus traits when we've talked before today, and I think it's a very interesting shift that this really refers to, which is the idea of sentiment is by the industry deemed to be relatively superficial as an idea, but this world of psychographic profiling is emerging behind in it. The understanding I have of it is sentiment is that top slice. It's how you have perceived something online and whether you're happy or sad in that moment, effectively. But psychographic profiling goes many layers deeper than that in understanding how you respond as a human. Could you tell us a little bit more about that world?
Yeah, so I mean, sentiment means different things to different people. I would be happy to go and watch a horror film at the cinema. That would make me happy, perversely, but my wife would hate that, you know? So different things make people happy in different ways, and what happiness and sentiment means differs depending on who you're talking to. So it's really key to understand the psychology of an audience and also how it kind of breaks down into psychological groups or personas, because that helps you craft an experience which is as resonant and effective as possible. So one example is for a immersive art experience client where you could kind of go and step into the world of Van Gogh, and it was 3D projections and things like that. And we did a psychological segmentation of their audience, both people who visit and people who would potentially visit. And we found that one of the segments they were talking to very strongly, and they were the ones who were visiting the most, which we call creatives. So these are people who are really into art. It's part of their identity. And to message them, you would ask rhetorical questions, for example, because they like to think about things for themselves and use very artistic, different imagery. And they were speaking to them very well. However, there was this whole other market that they weren't talking to, And the most valuable segment of all was casual families who are basically looking for something to do with the kids at the weekend. Because there's loads of them and there's a big group. So lots of them go and buy tickets and buy lots of merchandise and things. And they just weren't talking to them at all. And so that tells you how to rethink your communication strategy, possibly the experience itself. You know, there was one segment who were kind of more mature and looking for some fun bonding with their family, but comfort was really, really important to them. And there weren't really good spaces to sit in the space as it was currently. So if you want to appeal to that segment, it needs to be a bit more comfortable and better amenities. So that's just one example, but it's all about understanding their personality, their biases, how to nudge them. And also of those principles we talked about earlier, what's most important for them, because extroverts will value the social element more, whereas neurotic people, there's one principle, I call it not shit. You need to be not shit. There's a certain level of expectation that people have, and if you don't meet it, it feels like a loss, which is painful. So if someone's neurotic or anxious, that's really important for them. Make it comfortable, and at the very least, you know, fulfill all those basic expectations.
And actually, it's illuminating the point that you can't generalize a tribe or a demographic because of all these layers of psychographic profiling. There's so many different elements that are at play in your decision making as a consumer, and you have to start understanding much more to it rather than kind of assuming things. I mean, we had a really interesting moment on a project about a year or so ago, with a health club, where we were looking at rolling out various different products that they would give during different service moments throughout the health club journey. And we surveyed customers, and they thought they felt a certain way about certain drinks at certain moments, and whether they had too much attention or not enough attention. What they wrote down in a qualitative survey was certainly that superficial understanding. But we realized that as we were able to measure much more deeply how they felt at different moments and actually tested out these different service approaches, we realized they actually felt totally different to what they were saying. So it was all subliminal. And it was actually all reaction to, we were able to sort of pinpoint, we need to remove service moments from certain areas because actually people just wanted to be left alone. But actually we needed to really dial it up at certain moments and give out nootropics and things like that, and towels, and all that stuff really fitted into one specific area in that customer journey. And we were able to then demonstrate that had a created lifetime value in those customers. So it's very, very interesting. And I think this idea of relying on surveys has probably led brands down some of the wrong paths, and actually starting to really get the nub of it, of why people are making certain decisions. It's just absolutely fascinating.
And online gaming clients, where people can buy things in the game. And in the survey, one of the segments, they said, yeah, we're casual, we don't really spend that much, you know, easy breezy. We looked at the data, they actually spent the most because they were spending small amounts frequently rather than big amounts occasionally. They were insensitive to how much they were actually spending because they were just like, oh, I only spend 20p now and then, but they're actually spending loads. They just didn't realize.
And presumably the brands are then leaning into that and actually just creating a framework where they end up spending incrementally over time.
Exactly, yeah.
Fascinating. I would love to just talk about one thing that we showed you. We showed you our VR rig earlier today, but I think that there's one area which needs, which is certainly developing, and that's the idea of what are all the sort of, I guess, more ethereal ways that we can measure human response. And there's a bunch of creative technology and techniques you can use to measure pupil dilation and sweat on hands and heart rate and all of these things to see how someone actually felt in a moment. Rather than asking them, how did you feel? I can measure how you actually felt. Is this gimmicky in your mind, or is this the future?
It's definitely the future. Presently, it sometimes can be a bit gimmicky, so it can be a bit hit or miss, but if it's done right, then it's really, really good. Because essentially when someone has an experience, the very first thing that happens is there's a response in the brain.
Yeah.
And then maybe that comes through behaviorally or through certain physical signals, and then to your behavior. And then the last thing that happens is you rationally are aware of your behavior and you reflect on it. And so most measures get to that rational reflection, but it's very kind of far removed from the actual response.
Yeah.
And the further you get, the more noise there is.
Interesting.
So if you can get to biometrics or even, EEG or even fMRI, the closer you can get to that brain response, kind of the more predictive of actual behavior it is. But it can be very difficult and expensive to do brain scanning, but there are things kind of in the middle, like you said, biometrics, facial coding can be quite good if it's done well.
Yeah.
Implicit testing is probably one of my favorites, reaction time testing. So if the point of an experience often is to make a brand more front of mind and to link it to certain concepts like fun or innovative, you can measure that with a reaction time test. Essentially, is this brand fun? And you can see if people say yes or no and see how quickly they respond. And the idea is that an experience will shift that kind of memory connection and you can measure it. So lots of potential. It just needs to be done and well. And I think in the future, it will be even more scalable.
Yeah, and the techniques are definitely coming through now and people are developing this stuff much quicker. We had did a very interesting test last year, which is probably maybe something to finish on, but we did a test with a consumer products brand last year, and we were looking to understand whether ice creams tasted different depending on the environment that you were in. And we effectively immersed people in virtual reality, put them on a beach, put them on a mountain. I can't remember where else we put them, in an office, I think, and tested not only by asking them how that experience felt, but as they ate the ice cream, but also tested the sweat receptors and various different biometrics. And it was so, because I think intuitively when you're asked the question of how did it feel, was that experience more enjoyable on the beach or was it more enjoyable in the office, they intuitively had an idea, but actually the data that went with the biometrics kind of validated their point of view. And they all, everyone who did it looked at kind of the data and thought, actually, do you know what, that did feel a little bit different when I did that. It's very, very small changes, but this is the level of detail we're now being able to get to in how we measure human response. And it was just so interesting because we had this huge data set that then basically allowed us to kind of steer the brand in terms of how to change that experience when you're using experiential marketing and things like that. So to finish off, I'd just love it if you could just give us one or two key takeaways from your kind of views on all of this.
I think the most important thing is, despite the fact we live in a very technologically advanced world, don't forget to speak to the lizard brain of customers when you're designing experiences. So that means engage them emotionally, socially, in a human way. Face-to-face is preferable, really, getting people immersed physically in the real world. But not only engaging the lizard brain, but also remembering to kind of measure the lizard brain. So subconscious reaction time measures, for example, or biometrics, rather than just asking the human brain what it thinks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you in, and we will continue this conversation offline because I'm fascinated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.